Dr. Maya Johnson stepped out of the bustling subway station and into the crisp morning air of New York City, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Today was the day she had worked so hard for. She was finally starting her position as an attending physician at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. With her white coat draped over her shoulders, she felt a sense of pride swell within her. However, the reality of being a young black woman in a predominantly white institution loomed in the back of her mind, a whisper of doubt that threatened to overshadow her enthusiasm. As she walked through the gleaming entrance of the hospital, Maya took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of antiseptic and determination. The bustling staff and patients swirled around her, their expressions a mix of urgency and focus. She made her way to the elevator, her palms slightly sweating against the cool fabric of her coat. "You got this," she muttered under her breath, trying to quell the nervous butterflies dancing in her stomach. When she arrived at the third floor, Maya was greeted by the bright fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping of monitors. However, the moment she stepped into the nurse's station, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, an unspoken judgment that made her stomach twist. She approached the desk, where a group of nurses were chatting, their laughter echoing off the sterile walls. "Excuse me, I'm Dr. Maya Johnson, the new attending," she said, forcing a smile, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety. One of the nurses, a tall woman with a skeptical brow, gave her a quick once-over. "Oh, nice to meet you. I thought you were just another intern." The others chuckled lightly, and Maya felt her heart sink. She had spent years earning her medical degree, yet here she was, being reduced to a mere intern in the eyes of her peers. Before she could respond, Dr. Henry Lawson, her supervisor, strode into the station, his presence commanding attention. "Good morning, team," he boomed, glancing over the staff. His gaze landed on Maya, but instead of greeting her as the attending physician she was, he pointed towards the coffee machine. "Maya, could you grab us some coffee?" "Thanks." Maya's heart sank further. "Actually, Dr. Lawson, I'm the new attending, not an intern," she said, her voice firm, but the weight of his dismissal bore heavily on her. Right. Coffee it is then," he replied absent-mindedly, turning back to his conversation with other doctors, who were laughing at some inside joke. The nurses exchanged glances, their amusement palpable, and Maya felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She forced a smile and walked away, trying to shake off the sting of humiliation. Later that morning, during the morning rounds, Maya found herself trailing behind Dr. Lawson and the residents. She listened intently, eager to contribute, but felt the familiar sense of invisibility creeping back in. As they approached a patient's room, she overheard snippets of hushed conversations from the nursing staff. "Did you know she's from a small town? Probably hasn't seen much action," one nurse whispered, her tone laced with condescension. "Yeah, I heard she only got into this hospital because of diversity quotas," another chimed in. Maya's heart raced as she caught the tail end of their gossip. The air felt thick with prejudice, and she clenched her fists, feeling a fire ignite within her. She wouldn't let their whispers define her. She had worked too hard to let anyone diminish her accomplishments. "Excuse me," Maya interjected, stepping closer to the nurses. "I may be new, but I'm here to provide the best care for our patients. I hope we can all work together professionally." The nurses exchanged surprised glances, but Maya could see the skepticism in their eyes. She turned away, her resolve strengthening. She would prove herself, not just to them, but to everyone who doubted her. As the team moved on to the next patient, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and challenging journey, one that would test her resilience and determination at every turn. As the hospital prepared for a major health initiative, a palpable buzz filled the air. Dr. Maya Johnson stood by the conference room window, watching the hustle and bustle. She had spent the last few weeks gathering research and formulating ideas to streamline patient care, but this morning felt particularly disheartening. The meeting was about to begin, and she could sense the opportunity slipping through her fingers. Dr. Henry Lawson, her supervisor, strode into the room with an air of authority that seemed to eclipse everything else. He was flanked by Dr. Emily Chun, a colleague whose credentials paled in comparison to Maya's. Yet, as Maya had come to learn, Emily's demeanor, blonde hair meticulously styled, crisp white coat, seemed to earn her a level of respect that Maya struggled to attain. "All right, team, let's get started," Lawson announced, his voice booming. "Today, we'll discuss our approach to the new initiative. Emily, why don't you kick things off?" Maya's heart sank as Emily began to present her ideas. Ideas that Maya had shared with her in private only days before. "I was thinking we could implement a new triage system that prioritizes patients based on urgency rather than first come, first served," Emily said, her tone self-assured. Maya raised her hand tentatively, hoping to interject. "Actually, I have a few suggestions that could enhance that system," she said, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. Lawson glanced at her, then turned back to Emily. "Great point, Emily. We'll definitely consider that. But I think we should first focus on the training modules that need to be developed." He completely dismissed Maya's suggestion, the flicker of irritation in his eyes almost imperceptible, but nonetheless palpable. Maya's frustration bubbled beneath the surface, but she kept her composure. She knew she had to choose her battles wisely. She took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair, listening as the meeting progressed. It felt as though her voice had been swallowed by the walls of the conference room, lost among the discussions of less experienced colleagues. Later that afternoon, the hospital was thrown into a whirlwind when a patient was wheeled in, his condition critical. Maya's instincts kicked in as she rushed to the emergency room, observing the chaos unfolding before her. The patient, a middle-aged man, was gasping for breath, his skin a ghostly shade of gray. "Get a pulse ox on him. We need to stabilize his airway," Maya barked, her medical training taking over. She could feel the urgency of the situation coursing through her veins. Dr. Lawson entered the room, and Maya felt a flicker of hope. "Dr. Lawson, we need to intubate him immediately," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. Lawson frowned, assessing the situation. "Let's hold off on that for now. I think we should try a different approach first," he replied, gesturing to the younger interns as if to convey that they should follow his lead. "Time is critical. We can't waste it," Maya insisted, her frustration boiling beneath the surface. "If we don't act now, we could lose him." "Just follow my lead, Maya," Lawson said, his tone dismissive. "I've been doing this longer than you." Maya clenched her fists at her sides, determined not to let his condescension shake her resolve. She stepped back, watching as Lawson outlined his plan to the team, her mind racing with alternative strategies. She couldn't sit idly by while the patient's life hung in the balance. As the team prepared to follow Lawson's lead, Maya made a quick decision. She retreated to a corner of the room, gathering her thoughts. In her mind, she began mapping out her own treatment plan, one that prioritized the patient's immediate needs without the delays she feared would ensue. "Okay, think, Maya," she murmured to herself, scribbling notes on a nearby notepad. "If I can just stabilize his airway, I can buy us some time to figure out what's going on." Even as her heart raced with anxiety, a sense of determination washed over her. She was ready to fight for the patient's life, even if it meant going against her superior's wishes. It was time for her to take a stand, and with each word she wrote, she felt her confidence grow. As the hours passed, the tension in the hospital thickened like an impending storm. Maya stood at the foot of the patient's bed, observing the monitor's blaring numbers. The patient's condition had worsened significantly. His heart rate was erratic, and the pallor of his skin indicated he was slipping away. A wave of determination surged through her. She had to act now. "Dr. Lawson," Maya said, her voice steady yet urgent as she approached the attending physician, who was engrossed in his notes. "We need to reconsider the treatment plan. His vitals are deteriorating. I believe we should initiate the alternative therapy I suggested earlier." Dr. Lawson looked up, annoyance flickering across his face. "Maya, we've been through this. The standard procedure is what we need to follow. I can't have you making decisions that aren't backed by protocol." His dismissive tone fueled the simmering frustration within her. "But the standard procedure isn't working," Maya insisted, her eyes locking onto his. "We're losing time, and this patient needs immediate intervention. Please listen to me." A few of the nurses exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of concern and disbelief. They had witnessed how Dr. Lawson often disregarded Maya's insights, and now they could see the tension building like heat before a thunderstorm. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," he replied, his voice dripping with condescension, "but I'm the attending here. I'll make the calls." He turned back to his clipboard, dismissing her entirely. Maya clenched her fists, fighting the urge to scream in frustration. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was her moment to break free from the chains of systemic bias. She couldn't let the patient down. With a deep breath, she steeled herself. "I'm going to implement the treatment plan," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "I can't sit by and watch him suffer when I know we have a chance to save his life." The room went silent, the weight of her words hanging thick in the air. Dr. Lawson's head snapped up, disbelief etched across his features. "You're going rogue? Do you understand the implications of your actions?" "I understand the implications of letting a patient die." Maya shot back, the fire in her belly pushing her forward. "This isn't just about protocol. It's about a human life." Without waiting for his approval, she moved to the bedside and began to set up the necessary equipment. The nurses watched in stunned silence, unsure of whether to support her or to fear the consequences of defying their superior. "Maya, stop this at once!" Dr. Lawson barked, his voice rising. "You will jeopardize your career." But Maya was undeterred. "If I lose my job for saving a life, then so be it. I won't stand by and let systemic racism dictate my actions any longer." As she worked, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, some filled with admiration, others with disapproval. The tension in the room escalated, a palpable charge hanging in the air. "Are you really going to let her do this?" Dr. Lawson directed his question to the nurses, his voice betraying a hint of desperation. "She's right, Dr. Lawson." One of the senior nurses spoke up, her voice steady. "If you're not willing to act, then maybe someone else should. We're here to save lives." Maya felt a rush of support from the unexpected ally, but she remained focused on the task at hand. With each step of the process, she felt the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins, propelling her forward. Minutes felt like hours as she executed her plan, monitoring the patient's response closely. She could see the initial signs of stabilization in his vitals, and hope flickered like a candle in her chest. Dr. Lawson paced behind her, his agitation palpable. "This is insubordination, Maya. You're going to regret this." Ignoring him, she continued to work, her instincts guiding her. She could hear the soft beeping of the machines, the hushed whispers from the nurses, and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the patient's heart rate began to steady. The color returned to his cheeks, and for the first time, Maya dared to breathe a sigh of relief. "We did it," she murmured, her heart swelling with triumph. The room was still charged with tension, but now it was tinged with a sense of accomplishment. Dr. Lawson stood frozen, shock written across his face. "How did you?" he began, but the words fell silent as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Maya had acted decisively, and the patient was on the road to recovery. In that moment, amidst the chaos, Maya felt a shift, a crack in the foundation of the prejudice that had plagued her since her first day. She had taken a stand, and there was no turning back now. The hospital was in turmoil as news spread of a sudden outbreak of a mysterious illness. Dr. Maya Johnson stood in the bustling emergency room, the cacophony of voices and beeping machines creating an almost surreal atmosphere. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but it ignited a fire within her. This was her chance to step into a leadership role and prove her worth to everyone who had underestimated her. "Dr. Johnson," a nurse called out, urgency lacing her voice. "We need to triage these patients ASAP. The waiting room is overflowing." Maya nodded, her mind racing with the possibilities of how to properly manage the situation. "Let's set up a staging area in the conference room," she instructed, her tone clear and authoritative. "We need to screen patients for symptoms and separate the ones at high risk from the others. I want a detailed report on everyone who has been admitted in the last 48 hours. "Yes, Dr. Johnson," the nurse replied, her eyes sparkling with a mix of respect and surprise. Maya felt a surge of confidence. This was what she was meant to do. As the team mobilized, she caught sight of Dr. Henry Lawson, her supervisor, standing at the edge of the chaos, arms crossed and a scowl etched across his face. He was not pleased to see her taking charge, and she could sense the tension emanating from him. "Maya," he said, stepping forward with an air of authority that grated on her nerves. "I believe I should be the one coordinating this response. You're still relatively new here." Maya met his gaze, her heart pounding. "With all due respect, Dr. Lawson, I've been involved in infectious disease research, and I know how to handle outbreaks like this. We need to act quickly, and I'm prepared to lead this effort." Dr. Lawson's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. "This isn't a time for inexperience to take the reins. I have more experience than you'll ever have," he replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your experience hasn't helped us so far, has it?" Maya shot back, her voice steady but firm. "We're losing time. We need to put our egos aside and focus on the patients who need us." The atmosphere grew tense, and a few staff members exchanged glances, clearly caught in the middle of the escalating conflict. Maya could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every Black woman who had ever been overlooked and underestimated in the medical field. Just then, Dr. Sarah Chun, a senior physician, stepped forward. "Maya's right. We need to put our differences aside. If we don't act now, we could face a real crisis," she said, her voice resolute. Dr. Lawson hesitated, glancing around at the other doctors who were beginning to nod in agreement with Dr. Chun. Maya seized the moment. "Let's set up a strategy meeting," she said, her tone changing from confrontational to collaborative. "We need all hands on deck to figure out how to contain this outbreak. We can do this together." As the team gathered in the conference room, Maya took a deep breath, pushing down her nerves. The stakes were high, and she needed to command their respect. "I know this is overwhelming," she began, projecting her voice with authority. "But if we work together, we can stop this outbreak in its tracks. We'll assign roles based on your strengths, and I'll take the lead on patient assessments and data collection." Dr. Lawson remained silent, his jaw clenched. The others, however, began to respond, voicing their ideas and concerns. The meeting soon transformed from a battleground into a collaborative effort, the initial tension dissipating as they focused on solutions. As they devised a plan, Maya felt a swell of determination. She was no longer just fighting for acceptance. She was fighting for the lives of the patients who depended on her. This was her moment to shine, and she would not let anyone take it away from her. "Let's move," Maya commanded as the meeting adjourned, the palpable energy shifting into action. Yet, in the back of her mind, she knew that the battle was far from over. Dr. Lawson's resentment simmered beneath the surface, and she would have to confront it head-on if she wanted to truly change the culture of the hospital. Later that evening, as she reviewed patient charts and coordinated with the nursing staff, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She had taken a bold step, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges. And as she glanced up to see Dr. Lawson watching her from the doorway, arms crossed, she understood that her fight against systemic prejudice was only just beginning. As the outbreak continued to wreak havoc throughout the hospital, Dr. Maya Johnson felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. She navigated the bustling hallways, her mind racing as she coordinated the response efforts. In the break room, a group of nurses gathered, their faces a mix of anxiety and skepticism. Maya could hear snippets of their conversations, their whispers dripping with doubt about her leadership. "Can you believe she thinks she can handle this?" one nurse remarked, crossing her arms tightly. "She's just a kid in a white coat." "Yeah, how did she even get to this position? I mean, look at her," another chimed in, rolling her eyes. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself against the negativity. She knew that her leadership skills had been tested under fire, and she had earned respect from several staff members who had witnessed her decisive actions during the crisis. But the undercurrents of resistance were palpable, and she needed to address them head-on. In the midst of a chaotic day, Maya gathered her core team, a few nurses and a couple of junior doctors who had shown faith in her abilities. They met in a small conference room, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. "Listen, everyone," Maya began, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to work as a cohesive unit if we're going to tackle this outbreak. I know there are doubts, and I understand where they come from, but we've got to put those aside for the sake of our patients." One of the junior doctors, Dr. Lee, nodded in agreement. "You're right, Maya. We've seen what your decisions can do. We need to trust each other." Maya felt a flicker of hope at that moment, but it was quickly overshadowed by the looming figure of Dr. Henry Lawson, who strode into the room with an air of authority. "What's going on here? I hope you're not planning anything without my knowledge," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to let his presence intimidate her. "We're discussing the next steps for managing the outbreak, Dr. Lawson. I believe we need to identify the source of the illness to contain it effectively." Lawson scoffed, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "I've already spoken with the higher-ups. They want my input on this, not yours. I'll handle it." Maya felt her blood boil at his arrogance. "With all due respect, the sooner we act, the better. Ignoring my findings will only prolong the crisis. I have a theory about the contaminated supply chain, and we need to investigate it." Lawson raised an eyebrow, a smirk forming on his lips. "And what makes you think you're qualified to make such claims? You're still new here, Maya." Her heart raced, but she refused to back down. "My qualifications don't change based on your perception of me. I've done the research, and I'm willing to present the data to the administration if necessary." In that moment, Maya felt a shift in the room. Dr. Lee's eyes widened, and he exchanged glances with the nurses. "I'll back you up," he said suddenly, his voice firm. "If you have the evidence, we should present it." Lawson's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake aligning yourself with her, Lee. You'll regret it. Or maybe we'll regret not standing up for what's right," Dr. Lee countered, a defiant edge in his voice. The conversation hung in the air, tension crackling between them. Maya knew she had allies, but she also understood that she needed more than camaraderie. She needed concrete evidence to support her claims about the outbreak's source. After the meeting, Maya gathered her thoughts and headed to the library, poring over reports and data. Every minute spent searching felt like a step toward reclaiming her credibility. She meticulously documented her findings, determined to present a well-supported case against the mismanagement that had led to the outbreak. As she worked late into the night, she was buoyed by the idea of bringing the truth to light. With the support of her allies and the evidence in hand, she would uncover the systemic issues at play within the hospital and challenge the skepticism that weighed her down. Maya could feel the tide beginning to shift, and she was resolute in her mission to expose not just the outbreak's source, but the deep-seated prejudices that had sought to undermine her from the very beginning. As the outbreak reached its peak, the atmosphere in the hospital was thick with tension and uncertainty. Dr. Maya Johnson stood in the makeshift command center, her heart racing as she reviewed the data on her tablet. The numbers were alarming, an unprecedented spike in cases that had begun to overwhelm the hospital's resources. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, knowing that lives depended on her next actions. "Maya, we've got to act now," said Dr. Emily Chun, a fellow physician who had aligned herself with Maya during the crisis. "If we don't isolate the patients properly, this could spread even further." "I know, Emily," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We need to ensure that the information we've gathered about the virus is communicated clearly to everyone involved." If Dr. Lawson had just listened to us before, her thought trailed off, the anger and frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. She narrowed her focus, determined not to let her emotions cloud her judgment. Suddenly, an idea struck her. "Wait, I need to present this to the hospital administration. We have evidence that Dr. Lawson mishandled critical information that could have prevented this." Emily nodded, understanding the gravity of Maya's words. "I'll help you. We need to compile everything we have." Maya and Emily worked furiously, gathering reports and testimonials from staff members who had witnessed Dr. Lawson's negligence. Hours passed, and the once bustling command center fell quiet as other staff members began to sense the urgency of their mission. When they finally had everything ready, Maya took a deep breath and headed toward the administration office. As she entered the meeting room, she found herself facing the hospital's executive team, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Maya stood tall, her heart pounding as she began to present her findings. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," she said, her voice firm. "What we are experiencing is not just a crisis. It's the result of mismanagement and a lack of communication. I have evidence that Dr. Lawson failed to act on critical information that could have mitigated this outbreak." The room fell silent. Dr. Lawson, who had been summoned to the meeting, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This is outrageous, Maya. You're overstepping your bounds. I've been in this field for over 20 years. But you've let your pride get in the way of patient care." Maya shot back, her confidence rising. "While you were busy with your own agenda, the situation escalated, and people's lives are at stake. I cannot stand by and let this happen." Maya's eyes locked onto the faces of the board members, searching for any sign of support. To her surprise, several nodded in agreement, and she felt a surge of hope. After a tense discussion, the board made a decision. Effective immediately, Dr. Lawson is suspended pending an investigation, announced Dr. Green, the hospital's chief executive. "We will take the necessary steps to rectify this situation." As Maya walked out of the meeting, she was met with a wave of applause from her colleagues who had gathered outside the conference room. "You did it, Maya. You stood up for us," Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining with admiration. Maya felt a mix of relief and disbelief wash over her. The tide was turning, and for the first time, she felt seen and validated in her role as a physician. But the victory wasn't just hers. It marked a turning point for the entire institution. In the following days, as the hospital began to stabilize, Maya was called into another meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. There were smiles and a sense of resolve in the air. The board members were discussing a new initiative aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion within the hospital. "Maya," Dr. Green began, "in light of recent events, we believe it's essential to establish a mentorship program that focuses on diversity training for all staff. We would like you to take the lead on this initiative." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? Lead the program?" "Yes," Dr. Green replied with a nod. "You've shown incredible leadership during this crisis, and we believe you can help create a more equitable environment for future generations of medical professionals." Tears of gratitude brimmed in Maya's eyes as she realized the significance of this opportunity. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As she left the meeting, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey, marked by challenges and triumphs, had transformed not only her career, but also the culture of the hospital. This was just the beginning of a much-needed change, and she was determined to ensure that future physicians, regardless of their background, would feel empowered to lead and innovate.